Thank you for joining us today. This is June Klein-Bacon with the Brain Injury Alliance of Iowa, and we have Janine Rapp. She is one of our interns that we are lucky enough to have with us from the University of Iowa. She will be graduating shortly with her bachelor's degree in social work. And actually, we are pre-recording this, and so by the time we broadcast this, she will have already gotten her bachelor's degree and beginning her career utilizing that. She is getting her bachelor's degree in social work with a certificate in cultural competency as well as disability studies. So I definitely congratulate her on that. We have been lucky enough to utilize her skills in her internship here at the Brain Injury Alliance of Iowa. She has come to us with some experience utilizing services with Dayhab and supported community living, and she will leave us to go work with community neural rehab program in Iowa City. And so we've worked to put this together. She has done some research with Family and Self-Advocacy website that we wanted to share with you today. And so with that introduction, I'd like to turn this over to Janine Rapp to share a PowerPoint and review a great website that we've learned about. So Janine, if you want to go ahead and take this away, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
All right, sounds good. So we'll start off with a few housekeeping things, and so there will be no CEUs, but a certificate of attendance will be emailed out after the webinar is completed. And on your control panel, if you want, utilize the question box for any questions you have, but they will be answered at the end of the session, since as June stated, this is a pre-recorded session. So the purpose of advocacy is, as a part of our community outreach, we identified family and self-advocacy as an area that we at the Brain Injury Alliance of Iowa wish to increase facilitation of and for. Historically, we, just not in regard to people with disabilities, but in society, we've lived in a medical model where we've placed trust and guidance in those professionals that will tell us what to do. With changing times, we learn that navigating complicated systems, individual desires, leaps and bounds in medical and professional fields leave us with a gap. This fast-paced motion of our society doesn't allow very often for others to take the time to evaluate what questions we might have or should have to further our situation along. It's up to us individually to fill that gap. It takes practice, and it's a skill to learn how to advocate for yourself and for other people. By no means do we want to go in guns blazing with demands, but work to build relationships and partnerships in those with our lives to move us forward. So the website that we'll be using is adult.braininjurypartners.com. And it's to help understand what advocacy is and communicate with others to get what you need, and knowing where to find help and who can help you with advocacy. So this website, in a partnership with Ann Glang, who many of you have heard from at our recent annual conference and at our pre-conference session at ChildServe, is a leader in not only pediatric brain injury services, but she led us to evaluating this website. So we'll take some time today to review this website in detail to promote your ability to utilize it in your day-to-day journey to move forward. So from here, I'm going to switch to the website, and I will begin giving you a tutorial on that. So on this home page, you'll see the three big pictures that say open doors, make decision, and find balance. And under each of the pictures, it says learn more. So right here, it'll, if you click on that, it'll take you to one of the three of these heads of just topics, and I'm going to go through these in order, and then I'll just make sure to connect them back to the home page later. So we're going to start out with communication skills, which, as we know, is very important. So there is actually a 3-part tutorial that this website goes through, and the first part is called active listening. What's really great about these is that it tells you how long it's supposed to take, and 8 minutes to learn more about active listening is a pretty small amount of time to learn a really important skill when it comes to advocacy. So if we go to this tutorial, it'll tell you what you will be more aware of how to do after you complete it. So this tutorial is 8 pages and takes about 8 minutes to complete. So at the end of it, you'll learn to use good body language, communicate respectfully, and check your understanding. Also on this communication tab, right here, it talks about the communication style quiz, which is actually a pretty interesting thing. So you're going to go through it, and at the top here, it will talk about the 3 different kinds of communication styles that it will go through, and by the end of the quiz will tell you which one you tend to do. So as you see, it's just a little questionnaire that has different answers. So I'll just fill out an example of it. So I have difficulty saying no when someone asks me to do something I feel is unreasonable. So for this purpose, I'm just going to check all of one of the things so that we can just see an example of how it works. And so then each time you enter an answer, it will tell you your results and how the score has changed. So by answering that as always or almost always, it indicates you lean towards passive communication styles. And then below it, it tells a little bit about what you need to be doing. So you need to think about how to be more assertive, practice the skills demonstrated in this program, and it will help you be a better advocate. So I just think that communication style quiz is a really great starting point for people who are learning to advocate for themselves. And as you see underneath the what is your communication style, it has tags, which if you click on them, it'll take you to a resource list, and all of the pages on this website have tags, and any of them with the same tags will be on this website, which I think is a really great way of organizing it, just to make it easier so that if you are looking for more information on active listening, then it will show you that you can click on asking for help or talking with your boss, all that sort of stuff. So we're going to go back to the communication skills section and just go down the menu a little bit. So as I said, the active listening is part of a 3-part tutorial where the second part of it talks about how to acknowledge the other side and make a specific request, and how to offer an alternative solution if it's needed. So also right here, it links you back to the active listening part of the tutorial. So if you can't complete them all in the same time, then it's easy to access to know where a review part will be. And as we go back, I'm going to take you to part 3, and it's called See It in Action. So this has examples of how to use the active listening and problem solving that you learned in the first 2 parts of the tutorial. So we'll just click on this first one, for instance. So it says that a husband advocates for his wife. And so as you see, you have the video that you can watch here, and then it gives a little blurb about what the video will be about. So what's great about this part of the tutorial is that it's not just reading things, but that you can choose different responses and to see how he responds to different situations through the different the different skills that you've learned already. So the next tab is called Asking for Help, and it talks about the part 2 of the tutorial farther down here, which is effective problem solving. So it just talks about some of the struggles that might come along with asking for help and why some people might not offer effective ways to ask for help. So on the part 2 of the tutorial, it talked about how acknowledging the other person's side will be on that tutorial. And so here on this page, it will talk a little bit more about how to acknowledge the other side. And just states that people are more willing to help if they feel you understand their viewpoint. So sometimes it feels like it can be backtracking a little bit, but just by acknowledging that person to make them feel more included in the conversation can generally make it a more productive conversation and may end up with more useful help. So it talks about making a specific request and how to frame your request so the person you're talking to is willing to hear you out. So some of these things also seem to fall under the active listening things, such as using good body language, communicating respectfully, and checking your understanding. So this page is just really good information, and it also links it to the third part of the tutorial called See It in Action right here. And I'll just keep scrolling so it can just be read very briefly about if your first request for help is rejected and some advice behind that and steps that could be taken. So we'll head back up and move on to the Getting Organized section, which, as you can see from the tags here, it's tagged long-term planning, organization, and records. And once again, if you click on that tag, then it'll take you to a list of resources that are also linked to organization. So with Getting Organized, what it talked about is how to organize the things that you need to take. And the thing that I liked a lot about this was the big list of information about the injury. And this list is it's a checklist of information to present to professionals so you don't overload them with information. Whereas the family member, you tend to be one of the foremost experts on your family member who has had the injury. And sometimes it can be difficult to funnel the information when you want to tell them so much. So this big list just talks about how you're the expert and beginning the list. So with the following checklist, it just talks about like the vital information that you can tell the professional so they stay engaged with you and don't lose track of everything that's being talked about. So about the injury, how long ago was it? How was your family member hurt? How serious? Were they in a coma? Did your family member have other injuries? How long was the hospital stay? What was your family member? Was your family member in a rehab program? Was there physical therapy, occupational therapy, or counseling? And it just gives a lot of ways to describe the family member in both physical abilities and all of their other, excuse me. So it can talk about energy and fatigue, speech and language, vision, personality, hearing, appearance, behavior, and judgment. And so it just keeps going down a list that you can access to be able to describe your family member. And what's nice about this is that it talks about what's critical, reducing it to a 2-minute description makes you put what's most important and you can use it repeatedly. So by putting this skill into action, it gives the example of everything on the big list, and it puts it in a little blurb about how best to describe it. So because even if you're looking at this list, as I was scrolling, you can see that it's a very long list of things. But by putting it into this blurb here, it gives you different examples, such as a spouse explaining to a friend what happened and how it affected her husband, or a parent talking to a teacher about how it affected her son, sibling talking to a landlord about what happened to his sister. And it just gives examples of how everything on the big list is included into a concise description about it for those people to better understand it. So we already talked about the communication style quiz. So I will show that to you one more time. And it's just the same page that was linked onto earlier. So next we'll move on to talking with your boss. And as you can see, some of the things such as active listening are tagged in this so that you have access to it through the other pages that also have active listening tagged. So with talking with your boss, it talks about your rights as the employee and organizing your priorities. So organizing your priorities, you ask yourself the following questions. What's most important to me? What am I willing to negotiate or trade? What options will work best for me, and why are these options a solution to the problem? And what difference will this make for my health or well-being? So this also talks about how to consider the advantages to your employer for you to be able to get time off if that's what you're seeking. And it just gives some examples about how you'll be more productive when you're not worrying about your family member, how your loyalty to your employer will increase if they're willing to work with you on this, how your productivity will improve because you're not worrying or distracted by what may be going on and the fact that you can't be there, and how the relationships with your coworkers will improve because of, and then fill in your reason. So one of the most important things about this is making sure to be using effective communication when talking with your employer, which is, I think these, by acknowledging the other side and by showing that it's mutually beneficial, not just to you, because the employer will see it as a better reason if they also notice that it's beneficial to them. And the effective communication is talked about more here. And once again, the tutorials of active listening and effective problem solving are linked in right here. So with the effective communication, it talks about ways to set the tone, focus on productivity, check your understanding, and summarize the agreements that you reached with your employer. After you reach an agreement with your employer, it's important to get the agreement in writing so that neither person can change it, and that way if your employer for some reason decides to change their mind, then it will be in writing and they will have signed it, so they will need to continue to honor their disagreement. And then there's some more just about how to make the plan work, follow up, and why meeting with your boss regularly, even after reaching this agreement, is important. So talking with your children is next on the section menu, and just talking about how it can be hard to talk to your children about your family members with brain injury. And it just says how children are remarkably responsive, and just to be honest with them. So it talks about how children often believe they are the cause of your stress. So if you're stressed out about another family member, then a child might think that they're causing that. And how they like to feel included, and to make sure to share your feelings with your children. And it also talks about what happens when children take the back seat, and things to remember, such as they still need your attention. They need time with you and fun activities to help them feel connected. They may feel jealous or confused and not understand why you're spending less time with them and more time with your other family member. And they need to play to release energy and connect with friends. So next is dealing with difficult people. So on this, it talks a bit about climbing the assertive ladder. Assertiveness ladder. So it talks about the different rungs and what those are. So the assertiveness ladder comes from the National Family Caregivers Association. And how it talks about how mild confrontation may bring the desired changes with some people, while others may require heavier confrontation. So this talks about how to climb up the ladder. So start by using I statements to tell the person how you feel. And if that's not working, then take a step up to the second rung and share how others affect you. So what's great about this is it still gives examples about each rung of the ladder and how that can be communicated effectively. So keep going up, and it's rung 3, which is share in the now, to let others know your reaction to their words or behaviors right away. Rung 4 is speaking the truth and consequences, speak truthfully about the words or behaviors that are stressful for you, and to be as clear as possible, including the action you'll take if the behavior doesn't stop. So the final rung is rung 5, which is to disengage from the stress makers. So if you can't get people to change the words or behaviors you find stressful, then remove yourself from the situation. And it gives you examples of how you can remove yourself to prevent the stressors. And that can, and at the bottom of each page, it has a comment section that we welcome you to make comments, let us know what you thought about it, or just in general. I know some people like to have conversations on there with other caregivers, advocates, etc. So the next section we'll go to is coping. So back on the home page, coping is associated with finding balance. So then if you click Learn More on there, it will take you to the coping page. So as you can see on the main coping page, it talks about guilt, grief, mind, body, and soul, and a burnout quiz. But we'll go all through those in order on the section menu. So we'll start with guilt, regret, and anger. So this section has a video, and it talks a lot about what each of these means, such as guilt and regret and anger, and then it gives suggestions for coping. So how you should eliminate should from your vocabulary. Apologize only when it's appropriate. Don't let others push your guilt button. Look at what you've already accomplished. Face it, trace it, erase it. And it continues to give some more good examples on coping with this. So next is grief, and it has another video where a woman is talking about how she deals with grief. And so this talks about loss and grief, riding the roller coaster, and how it's an ongoing process. Here it talks about the stages of grief, which are numbered 1 through 6 and give an approximate timeline. But one thing that I've learned is that grief comes in, it doesn't necessarily come in the order that this lists, and that you can move back and forth between different stages. So sometimes you can feel profound sadness, and the next day you can feel acceptance, and it's okay to go back to the profound sadness and mourning again. There's no set way that you should go through grief, and each person is different in how they work through it and how they handle it on their own. So this talks about how you grieve a living family member, because often grief is associated with the loss or death of a family member, where some people can have difficulties finding that difference and knowing how to deal with grieving the loss of someone who is still living. So it also gives some more tips for coping, and just a couple of those examples are expressing your feelings, talking with a friend, and talking with others in a similar situation. So it gives quite a bit of it, and then it also gives some references where if those would be anything you would be interested in reading, I'm sure you could find them on the internet. And this one here has a link directly to this article called Loss, Grief, and Mourning. So next is respite. So the dictionary defines respite as a brief period of rest and recovery between periods of exertion. So it just talks about things that families do, getting help from family and friends, and hiring a professional respite care provider. So hiring a professional respite care provider is something that I know a lot of families personally that have struggled with finding the right provider, trusting them with their loved one, etc. And so it just talks about some of the information that you need to provide to them, and how best to choose a provider, what questions to ask, and the options for paying for the respite services. And some examples of that are insurance, Social Security, Medicaid, veterans benefits, foundation grants, service organizations, state agencies, and the Brain Injury Association. So it gives some other funding services, and then there's a link here to the Brain Injury Association of America, which is the national branch. And it also gives another source of where some of this information was found from. It's called Putting Pieces Together, an online intervention for pediatric brain injury. So next is mind, body, and soul. And it talks about how most of us know we're supposed to eat well, exercise, and reduce stress, but when you're caring for someone with a brain injury, life can get in the way of your best intentions. So it just gives you some examples of how to eat better, such as a 15 to 30-minute recipe, or eating less more often, begin smart snacking, just little things to help you eat better and feel better. Talks about exercise and take activity breaks at work, stretch while you're waiting for toast or coffee, use time spent on hold on the phone, exercise while watching TV, and doing a little bit more walking. So it says that exercise is one of the most effective ways to fight stress and to prevent burnout, and how you'll feel less tired once you start including moderate activity in the day. So next is relaxation, and how taking a mini vacation from stress can change the rest of your day. So just breathe to relax in a relaxation exercise. And then on here it talks about an exercise you can do to help with relaxation. So It also talks about how by expressing yourself through journaling or making something, taking a walk, exercising, can also help with this. Oh, excuse me. So next, as I was talking about on the first main page, is the Burnout Quiz, which is very similar to the communication styles quiz in the format and how it answers it. So I'll give a little bit of an example again, just so you can see how the results work. So I wake up in the morning and dread the day. So I'm going to choose the opposite of what I did with the old one, which is never or rarely. So then at the end, it'll tell you your level of burnout. So I think there's low, moderate, and high. So if you were to answer always or almost always for multiple questions, we'll see how it changes. So a medium risk of burnout, and how you handle a lot of stress on the daily basis. Some days are easier than others, and just suggest to manage your stress to avoid burnout. But if we continue to click these, we will get to take a look at the high risk of burnout. So as you can see, there's a bit more detail on this one and just the best way to help handle stress. So Finding Others talks about building a circle of support and joining a support group, or even starting a support group if there's not one specific to you in the area, which the Brain Injury Alliance of Iowa, if you're looking for a support group, has many resources to help you find a support group closest to your area. So there's also numerous caregiver websites, bulletin boards, chat rooms, and email lists that you can become a part of it for an online community if there's also not a support group directly in your area. Next, it talks about coping styles and the 5 kinds of coping styles, which are cognitive, psychological, spiritual, support system, and physical. So this states that there are positives and negatives to each coping style, but different coping styles within families can lead to conflict and more stress sometimes. So below it talks about each of the 5 different styles of coping and how, so for instance, cognitive copers use literature to learn about brain injury, and some of the things they are most likely to do is to read books and pamphlets, call brain injury associations, talk to families with a member who has a brain injury, and then below here it gives an example of a cognitive coper. So below here is psychological, and it goes through the same things that they are most likely to do, and another example of what a psychological coper will look like. So as you go down the page, it talks about spiritual copers who place trust in a higher power, support system copers who rely on others to provide encouragement and support, and physical copers who actively participate in events to reduce stress. So then it just gives a quick little blurb about why coping styles matter and how there are no right styles, only different styles. And by recognizing these can help us through difficult times and reminding us that others are dealing with their issues as best they can. So now we'll be moving on to the section of what's needed. And this is another one of the pages that was linked to on the home page of the website. So there's a link here entitled Holding On and Letting Go. So we'll just take a look at that. And it talks about changing roles in adult independence. So on here, there's some more videos and talks about self-determination under independence and how roles might be changing within the family post-injury. So it talks about some things to think about and questions that you may have. So this is really great because it has multiple videos on this section. So it talks about how it's often hard to know when to step in and when to let your family member with a brain injury advocate for themselves. So we'll just start from the top here, which is independent living quizzes. So unlike the other two quizzes I showed you, there are multiple quizzes, such as basic survivor self-care, community skills, daily living needs, driving readiness, home safety, medication management, money management, and substance abuse. So if we go to this one, it talks about basic survivor self-care. And so it gives you the directions. So this is a quiz for you to take about your loved one. And so you go through the questions and does your loved one need assistance with, and then you answer the questions. So as you can see, it's a bit longer than the other questions. And I will just complete this as an example again to see how it works. And I will click no for all of them just to remain consistent. So then here it talks about the number of yeses and the low risk score. So it says for low risk, your family member is probably safe and able to live independently if they, and it gives examples of some of the things that are key to living independently. And then a nice feature on here is that you can print this page, so you can keep track of it, or as time goes on, you can take the quiz again to see if the score has changed. So just as I showed you before, there are several quizzes that can be taken that may assist in determining if independent living is a feasible option. So specialists is the next on the list, and it talks about who to look for, and someone who's familiar with the program or service you're considering, has experience with individuals with brain injury, and knows the lingo used by the program, who to get recommendations from, and what specialists can provide you with. So it also gives some examples of things, plans, and services a spouse might need when advocating for her husband who wants to return to work. So this talks about Social Security and learning services to determine how his disability benefits will be affected by returning to work. Representatives from the company that handles his employer's disability policy. Support group run by Brain Injury Association. A plan from the Department of Voc Rehab. Referral from his doctor for a driver evaluation program at the Rehabilitation Hospital's outpatient department. So then, as you can see, it just gives a few more examples and talks about some questions to ask before deciding on a specialist. So next it talks about transition planning and how it's an ongoing process, how families are able to be actively involved in the treatment and rehab process, are able to learn by observation and input from therapists in ways their family member may need hands-on assistance and community resources to progress. So it talks about why records are important and some of the changing needs. So as recovery continues, common sense and an observant family can anticipate their family members' changing needs. So then here it just gives up some areas which your family member may need assistance, such as help with activities of daily living, medical management, structuring the day, money management, memory aids, etc. And then right here it links back to the quizzes to help with this planning process. So this it links back to holding on and letting go, which we looked at the beginning. So we will just go back to the what's needed page. And here it also talks about related content, such as the Burnout Quiz, which we did already, and it will link back to other places. So like clicking the Burnout Quiz will just take you back to the Coping tab under the Burnout Quiz. So next we'll move on to finding help. And finding help is mainly around resources. So in this menu, it talks about advocacy resources, brain injury related, caregiving support, educational and vocational rehabilitation, financial and legal, government, housing and transportation, recovery, and trips to searching the web for other resources. So, like for instance, case management was on the last tab, and you can also find it on here. So all of the resources listed on this page are also summarized in this section menu. So we'll just click on case management as an example of what this will look like. So it also has the tags of other places that may be connected to it, and so it talks about some examples of case management are the American Association of Nurse Life Care Planners, National Social Worker Finder, Commission on Rehabilitation Counselor Certification, and if you just go down the list, it just helps with some resources related to caregiving. So I'll go through one more just to show something different. So we can go through housing, and that one is also tagged to independent living. So if you looked at independent living, both case management and housing would be under that tag. So here again, it's linked to the independent living quizzes, which we just looked at, and it talks about, so under here it also says to use the comments tab to share housing resources that you find that might be helpful to other people. So Home for Our Troops, Virtual Centers for Independent Living Directory, National Center for Assisted Living, and as with the case management going down the list, it just gives examples of some of the resources that are associated with this. So we will move on to advocate stories because the finding help is just all of these resources, and each person needs different resources, so I will let you guys go through that as you need on your own. So advocate stories, it talks about meeting the advocates who helped create this program. So at the beginning we talked about Anne Lang, who was both at our Brain Injury Alliance of Iowa's annual conference and pre-conference. So it talks about what she's done and how she became an advocate for families with brain injury and just some of her advice. So, and it also asks what her favorite resource is, where she states brainline.org. So next is the action plan, which is a tool used by businesses, government, and individuals, and is particularly helpful for families whose lives have been altered by brain injury. So over here it talks about the different steps. So step 1 is goals. So begin with hopes and dreams, include others in the process. Establish goals using a SMART system, which is specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, and timely. And then it gives definitions about what each of those will do. So for instance, an example of a SMART goal would be Julie will volunteer at a day center 1 day a week for a month. So that way it's measurable by if she attended the daycare center 1 day a week. What you want to happen, which is attending the daycare center. Realistic, where it starts out small and moves up in baby steps. And timely, so it sets deadlines. So for 1 month would be the deadline. So you can identify both long-term and short-term goals, and just to prioritize each goal. So step 2 is pinpoint obstacles. So this one's a shorter one where it talks about how obstacles may have sources and to identify the specific obstacle for each of your goal. And just below are here are some of the suggestions. So it says now that you've listed all the obstacles, you're ready for step 3. Identify strategies for overcoming obstacles, which you can also access step 3 on the section menu. So they say this is the fun part where you get to brainstorm creative strategies to get around the obstacles you've identified. So it gives you some helpful tips such as listing all the ideas, don't judge, don't get attached to one solution, and get input. Then I evaluate and prioritize. After you've exhausted your ideas, choose 1 or 2 strategies to work on. One way to do this is to identify which strategies seem the easiest to do or most likely to be successful. And then that moves you on to step 4, which is creating action steps. So now you're ready to select several strategies and take action. So it talks about the essentials of good action steps such as what, who, and when, how to vary the steps, make them SMART, which is what we talked about the goals, and we gave here's another example, is to play basketball in the driveway with Stephen on Wednesdays and Fridays after work. So the specific is Stephen will play twice a week on Wednesdays and Fridays. Measurable is you can track when Stephen played. Action-oriented, that you are following through with the activity. Realistic, that the time and place are convenient. And timely, you will be helping Stephen improve his motor skills before he starts community college classes in the fall. So after an appropriate period of time, you want to review how the plan is succeeding, which brings us to step 5, reviewing the plan. So by checking on the progress of each action, step, or goal, you can see what needs have been met and which have not. So when you and your family member have this information, it's easier to refocus everyone's energy into the areas that are most important. So some of the helpful tips are develop a plan for tracking progress. So for the example from the previous page of Stephen playing basketball, to set a number of months over how long you want to track that for, and then seeing how often he is playing basketball as was listed in the goal. So to, if you get stuck, work on a different goal, break large goals down into action steps down into smaller, more manageable tasks that take smaller steps, which make the bigger goal easier to accomplish. So schedule regular check-ins and update the action plan. So when a goal has been met, congratulate yourself. It's something to celebrate. Identify the barriers. And here's just another example. So after reviewing the plan on the section menu, it says planning a meeting. So it talks about how it's helpful to do action planning in a group and what you can do to make your meeting successful so that everyone feels the meeting has met its goals. So it just talks about who should attend, such as family members, educators, community members, and friends. Choose a person to facilitate the meeting, and it gives several roles that a good facilitator would have: preparing for the meeting, creating an agenda, conduct the meeting, and so then it talks about suggestions for moving through your agenda, such as different items like introductions, reviewing your family member situation, goals, hopes, and dreams, obstacles to achieving goals, strategies to overcome obstacles, action plan. So all of the steps that we previously went through up here in the section menu. And then here below is a sample action plan, which I won't read through, so everyone can read through on their own if that's something they're interested in having assistance with. And then there is an action plan worksheet. So fill in your answers and it'll help you make a sample action plan. So what is my goal? And it talks about the SMART goal still, so that you can enter that here. What obstacles may make it difficult? So it takes you step by step through creating the action plan on a worksheet. And so that is all that I have about the website. I will just click here for the tags. And so they've added tags, or keywords is another way to look at them, to their content. So here are just all of the tags that are available. And it's just under this handy little tab so that you can easily access it and look and see where everything is connected. So next there's some videos, and it gives all of the videos that have been on the website. So you can just go and look and see specifically which videos you liked, and that way you don't have to go back through and try to remember specifically which page it was on. So now we're going to transition back to the PowerPoint. So that was the Brain Injury Partners Advocacy Skills for Families website. And so support and advocacy. The Brain Injury Alliance of Iowa, legislative and systems advocacy, individual support, neuro resource facilitation, and case consultation with providers. Some of you may be aware that the Brain Injury Alliance of Iowa is immersed in systems advocacy at many tables around the state, including legislative advocacy when and where we can be. To be involved, get to know who your legislators are and communicate the needs of persons with disabilities. Get on our email listing and we can find out notifications of action alerts to help guide this process as well. We also host events on the Hill, including the annual Legislative Advocacy Day. As part of our Neuro Resource Facilitation Program, we are happy to provide support through the systems as well as do case consultations and communication with the providers. So thank you so much for joining us. Here's our contact information. Our main website is www.biaia.org, and the email address is the general email address. You can email if there's any questions, and the 855 phone number is our toll-free line where someone checks it daily if you have any questions or are interested in having a family member enrolled in services. So thank you so much.
Okay, and thank you for joining us today. We will go ahead and begin to take questions.